Hello creatives, welcome back. Today we'll be painting Gomphrena flowers and the colors that I'm using today are alizarin crimson, permanent rose, Indian yellow, perylene green, sap green and green gold. So let's get started. The first step is we'll be making a rough sketch of these beautiful Gomphrena flowers. So the basic shape that these flowers are in is sort of like a teardrop shape. So I'm starting with the rough teardrop shape and then I'm going ahead and marking these tiny petal-like structures that come out from all the edges and gives it a nice fuzzy texture. Next up are the leaves. The leaves are very characteristic and interesting. You can see that they're very thin and curl a certain way, so I'm just capturing that. And then they have extremely long stems. The ones that I have here have dried up, but you can take my word for it. If you want, you can Google it. They do have beautiful, slender, nice stems. For brushes, I'm going to be using two brushes. One is a larger size filbert brush and the other is a smaller size one. These are both from Winsor & Newton's Scotsman range. If you don't have a filbert brush, feel free to use a round brush. That's going to work absolutely fine. I'm going ahead and first wetting the entire surface of this flower. But the way I'm doing it is I'm doing it in strokes. I'm not going ahead and entirely wetting the complete flower head. Instead, I'm making wet strokes. Then I'm going ahead with my smaller brush and dropping in some pigment in the wet areas. So this is our wet on wet technique with watercolors. And while you're dropping this pigment, you would want to drop in different values. So now you can see I'm going ahead with a darker value in comparison to the one which I had earlier dropped. It was a lighter value. When I speak of values, what I mean is a lighter value has more water and less pigment, and a darker value has less water and more pigment. Okay, now I'm going ahead with the green. So again, you can capitalize if the flower head is still wet. Go ahead and introduce a little bit of green towards the bottom of the flower head. That way we'll get a gorgeous red to green bleed. Next up, I'm painting the stem and the thin slender leaves. Not trying to be perfect, but just making sure that they have lots of movement. It's always great to have your reference right next to you. So I have these dried flowers and I'm referring to them whenever I'm attempting the flower head or the leaves. If you have the actual flower, amazing. If you don't have access to it, just feel free to go ahead and use Pinterest. You can look up pictures of Gomphrena and that will give you a great idea. And that will give you a good idea on what details you'd like to capture or what details stand out to you. Next up, I'm going ahead and taking a really dark value. So this is purely pigment and I think just barely water, maybe 10% water. And I'm refining the edges. So you can see that the edges of these flowers are distinctly fuzzy. There's this texture to it. So I'm just adding thin strokes towards the edges of our flower head to communicate that. And I'm also taking some of this darker pigment and dropping it in smaller strokes in the front part of the flower head as well, just to make sure that we are capturing that fuzzy texture throughout. Next, I'm going to take some darker green color and I'm going to run it across the stem just to communicate dimension. And lastly, I'm just adding a little bit of this darker green color towards the bottom of the flower because that's where the stem and leaves would be the darkest, as this is the place where most of the shadows would fall. And yeah, that's it. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. If you do happen to give it a try, make sure to tag me at The Whimsical Creative. I'd love to see your creation. If you'd like to be notified whenever I upload such tutorials, make sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel so that you'd be the first one to know whenever the next one goes live. I'll talk to you soon. Till then, happy creating.